have Attorney Vanita Banks, a cybersecurity expert. Uh, the famous Milton Grimes, LA, is going to give us a report today, hopefully, on that election scramble they're having out there. Also, we have Marlon Prime, former U.S. Attorney, a Deputy U.S. Attorney in the Cleveland area, and give us helpful insight of what's going on with the government. But we'll start today. Uh, Marlon, what is the Black unemployment statistic now? And I think it's a serious matter because I see a lot of African Americans out of job.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and Nathaniel and your audience here. Certainly, it's a challenging news for members of our community. We're seeing reports of rates anywhere between 7.3% down to high 6%. And it's problematic, Nathaniel, because many of the traditional areas where African Americans have been employed, particularly state, federal government, you're seeing a lot of layoffs. And unfortunately, especially in areas like Washington, D.C., where I live, we're seeing even more pronounced levels of Black unemployment. So it's something deeply troubling that we all should be concerned about. In addition to that, there have been a number of breakouts regarding Black female unemployment has been stubbornly high. The other thing that your audience should know about as well is that there are a number of us that push back on various individuals that have been hired by this administration to report accurately, data. And so there is some concern about, their the reliability of the information that we're getting from the administration. But in answer to your question, it's stubbornly high, particularly in traditional areas that have helped, employ many African Americans.
What about that job report that we heard this week? Do we think that information that was reported was accurate? It was a favorable job report. What do you think?
See, I'd be interested because uh, I don't see the same America that the job report. I just don't see that. I see a lot of human suffering. I see people that can't afford to pay their bills. Right now, the economic factor in our economy is getting bad. I mean, we have now in America history, we have the highest amount of money on credit than we've ever had in American history right now. And that's a bad thing. I
We see
saw an
farmers.
economist from the administration thought it was a good idea, but I'm thinking that's a dumb idea because if people max out their credit, then ultimately that means that they will spend less money. If they spend less money, that means they would go into recession. So I don't know. I just don't see it. Maybe Milton or Marlin has better statistics in their area, but I see a lot of suffering from my standpoint, Attorney Banks.
We see farmers suffering as a result of tariffs and high cost of fertilizer and other goods. We see the continuing increase in food cost as well as cost at the gas pump continuing to soar highly, with Milton, California, boasting, unfortunately, the highest gas prices across the nation. I was in California a couple weeks ago, and my goodness, the costs are so incredibly high. And I agree with you, Renee, one of our loyal callers from New York, that the job report just does not appear to be credible.
Well, what do we expect with the administration cutting back on the employment in the federal government? And isn't this a likely outcome? Giving corporate America the right to fire people, lay off people, what can we expect?
Well,
And your audience has to remember as well is that, if early on in the administration, where when individuals were giving what was perceived to be accurate information, they were let go or very severely criticized. So I think, people have a right to be concerned about whether the new data is accurate.
Well, my concern is that I've seen dramatic shift in the stock market, right? So the stock market, in my view, does not adequately reflect what's going on in America. The stock market is too uh, optimistic in terms of the growth. For example, we see a significant increase in the cost of living, some of the basic essentials, food costs, utility costs, gas prices, and things like that. And so that means that households have less money to spend because the basic essentials of just living is being taken away. Rent costs, for example, here in Indianapolis is sky high. Um, it's shocking to me how much rent in Indianapolis has increased in the last 5 years from what it used to be. I've seen apartment rent now in our city is similar to what it is, well, maybe what it used to be like in cities like DC and New York. Uh, I was surprised to learn that right the building a couple blocks away from my office, they're renting a two-bedroom unit for $3,400 a month apartment that you can hear your neighbor in the opposite room.
But
So I think that the economic factors is not good. And like our audience, I just don't trust these reports. Milton, Marlon, or Vanita. I just don't. I see a lot more human suffering than what's indicated in these reports.
And we also know that in terms of African American women that have the most college degrees in this nation, that we've seen since the initial inauguration, we've seen 300 to 500,000 African American women terminated from their jobs. It's a deplorable situation.
well, that's
Okay, moving on to the next. There's so many different things going on. Uh, I know Attorney Banks brought this up. The redistricting case started off with the Louisiana versus Calais, that 6-3 devastating decision. Then the Alabama congressional map. Uh, it seems like these cases, we're seeing American history being reshaped within a relatively short period of time by the current Supreme Court. Uh, and then the Florida map, is interesting because Florida Constitution does not even permit that. So that's going to be real interesting. So you got these all-out litigation, and the net result is if they are successful in redrawing these maps, uh, the forecast is that we could lose possibly half of the African Americans in Congress. And so, it's like we're going in reverse back to the 50s almost. It's a really sad day to see what's occurring.
In the Alabama decision this week, again, this was a 4-page unsigned shadow docket order. The court held that the lower court in the Milligan versus Allen case, the Alabama case, the court held that the lower court had not heeded its ruling in the recent Calais, Louisiana case. So the court is essentially allowing Alabama to use a congressional map that the lower courts in Alabama have found to be intentionally discriminatory against Black voters. And so that determination and that decision seems inconsistent. And from my perspective, it's the latest blow and really the death knell of the Voting Rights Act, which we saw essentially eviscerated in the Louisiana Calais case a couple of weeks ago. And my perspective at this point is that we can no longer rely on the Voting Rights Act to protect minority voters in against redistricting and gerrymandering. So we've got to reform gerrymandering structurally and look at reforms such as changing the state constitution, for example, to outright ban or prohibit gerrymandering or prohibit redistricting in prohibiting gerrymandering altogether, but specifically prohibiting it except on a 10-year basis at the time when there is the 10-year census taking place. Also, we need to look at independent citizen commissions to conduct redistricting. We really have to get away from relying on the Voting Rights Act to protect the fundamental right of minorities to have their votes matter across the nation.
Mm.
Yeah, this is really an egregious decision, and I think what we need to do is just really prepare your audience, Nathaniel, to really kind of deal with some of the talking points that we're seeing on mainstream media, and it's really entirely inaccurate. Many of our conservative brothers went on the air after the Louisiana Calais decision and said, "Hey, nothing to worry about here. All the Supreme Court was saying is that in order for there to be a violation of Section 2, you must prove intentional discrimination." That's problematic because a lot of the things that we saw that led up to the Voting Rights Act, it was colorblind in terms of grandfather clauses, in terms of poll taxes. It applied to everyone. So the history and the legislative history of the Voting Rights Act was it wasn't the intent, it was the effect on individuals. Now, the other thing that's really problematic when looking at that decision is that hold a pin on what they said that, hey, only intentional discrimination applies. It's against what the legislative intent was. Now, this week, they really showed a lot of hypocrisy because we had a fact finding by conservative judges. There was a 3-judge panel who basically heard evidence, heard witnesses, and they concluded in the Alabama decision that there was intentional discrimination. So if the Supreme Court was following their decision in the Clay decision, you would think they would say, hey, the Alabama map is unconstitutional because it discriminates intentionally against Black people. Now, what the Supreme Court did in an unsigned, in a this docket that they're doing, which is just basically expedited, proceedings. They basically said it's okay. So it really shows a lot of hypocrisy, and I think one of the things we have to look at now is just Supreme Court reform, because Chief Justice Roberts indicated that, hey, in his run up to his nomination and confirmation hearings, that he was just going to call balls and strikes. But this is clearly shows that the court is not calling balls and strikes, that there's a lot of hypocrisy in terms of their rulings. So it's important that we really educate our public in terms of talking about these issues, that it doesn't really add up and it doesn't add up to the facts.
Well, I'm concerned about this radical departure from norm. And, I don't know, Milton may have some historical context. Milton, how do you see our judicial system changing when we have these rules? I mean, you're back there probably in like 1910 or so, I guess. I mean, but
I
there,
think the president has thoroughly and effectively intimidated the judiciary and the legal system. He may not be winning all of the battles, but he's winning enough of them to affect our society. And admire you guys who stand on top of this to break it down the way you're breaking it down. But when I sit back and look at this 6-3 decision and realize that unless we get some more minorities or females or people who think a little bit more progressive and liberal on the U.S. Supreme Court, we're going to be faced with an uphill battle for a long time, um, dealing with their decision as it trickled down. So that's how I see it, Nate, that we have a battle ahead of us.
Well,
Yeah,
the court has now allowed Alabama to use a congressional map that the lower court had found to be intentionally discriminatory against Black voters. So that makes the Supreme Court's um, own language, from my perspective, inconsistent. It says one thing and about what the law still forbids, which is, quote, intentional discrimination, which is so difficult or impossible to prove, but then it tolerates conduct that appears to fit the description of intentional discrimination. Again, the lower court found that the state had intentionally discriminated against, Black voters. So, from my perspective, moving forward, we have to look at and confront the fundamental problem itself. And gerrymandering as a fundamental principle is a threat, to our democracy. And so we're going to have to look beyond advocating that these maps are intentionally discriminatory, because the Supreme Court has just allowed that in the Alabama situation. And we've got to look at greater and more fundamental reforms of the gerrymandering, redistricting structure.
what I see that's occurring, one of the political pundits said something that was pretty profound that I saw on TV this week. They're saying that what they're actually doing is their target is the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment does some important things, particularly as related to African America. The 14th Amendment establishes birthright citizenship. So, in other words, anyone born or naturalized in the United States is a citizen. But the most important thing for African Americans is that it provides equal protection of the laws. And that served as a foundation for all our civil rights gains in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And so uh, the problem is that these attacks are slowly going to the core of what make America an exception, and also how African American make gains in America. So if we keep attacking these constitution, and they started with the fact that I was just shocked that the Supreme Court heard a case about birthright citizenship. Of all the cases, that's something that was established back in 1868. How in the world did we come to a time in America where the 14th Amendment became an issue in our country? And so now I don't think most people recognize or appreciate how damaging that would be to even have them argue this issue about the 14th Amendment. I mean, my excessive force case, 1983, we do civil rights, we do the 14th Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, but we use those constitutional amendments to litigate cases. And um, the 14th Amendment, it had a disqualification for office for insurrection. Section 2 of the voter right, it also gave congressional powers and things like that. So it's an important amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and it is under attack now, and I'm concerned about that. I mean, it's just not getting enough publicity, as in this case that was argued before the Supreme Court, although it's looked like that they're going to basically deny this idiotic attack on the 14th Amendment. But On the other hand, I'm getting a little bit nervous because these decisions keep making out exceptions on things.
What's going to be a scary time for our country? Let's just think about the impact of that. If, first of all, many of the Supreme Court justices in the conservative bloc really promised that they were going to respect precedent, that they really criticized the Warren Court for being judicial activists. And we're seeing a lot of judicial activism from this court. As you pointed out, Nathaniel, there's been settled precedent in this area. In other words, prior cases decided that, the Supreme Court is recognized for decades, and now we're trying to revisit that. But we have to look at the potential impact of such a decision. If for some reason it was denied, you would have a whole slew of Americans who are brought here as children, would have no rights, maybe would not be able to get health care, education, almost a subclass of citizenship. We see Stephen Miller, who is part of this administration, really, pushing toward these radical positions that have been settled for quite some time. So I hope you're right that, that there'll be an adherence to precedent, but given what we've seen in the Voting Rights Act cases and how they just, rewrote the 15th Amendment, one cannot be sure in terms of what the court will do.
Attorney Banks, you wrote a comment that they were skeptical, Attorney Banks, but if they were so skeptical, why in the heck did they have the argument in the first place? All these people trying to get a case for U.S. Supreme Court. Why this case? Why wasn't it just denied? You're on mute, Attorney Banks. Go ahead. Okay.
I am unsure as to why the Supreme Court is accepting these cases, including this one, which seems so clear, which is so clear based on the Constitution.
Okay. Well, the next topic is California, Milton Grimes territory, and it's something very important. In 2024, California became the fourth largest economy in the whole world. United States economy in 2024 with 29.1 trillion, China with 18.74, Germany at 4.65, California with 4.1, ahead of Japan, India, and United Kingdom. And so why is this important? Why we're talking about this? Because California is 1/7 of the national economy of the United States of America. And they have this strange voting that they're doing in California. And I was listening to the commentary, they call it the jungle primary. The jungle primary. And they have some really interesting voting process. They allow same-day registration and voting. And I was watching some situation where people tried to register, and of course they were caught and denied the same day because their system automatically is able to pull up address and verify the person identification. So they brought in the federal government, the state government, everybody watching their voting. But I was looking at this, Milton, particularly in LA, at the number of voters you have in LA versus the number of votes that's already been counted. And, I don't know. I don't know whether or not this is the best system or not, but it certainly seemed like it's cumbersome. And
Well, Trump said it was illegal, didn't he? Said the election out here was illegal, even though the candidates are saying that it's straight up and they didn't see any illegality about it. But Trump said he's going to show the proof of it, but he's accusing us of having an illegal, corrupt election already, just based on his hunch. So you have a lot of attention drawn to us, but you don't have any evidence that we've done anything, that the voting has been illegal as he claims it is. But he's going to keep that stirred up. You have an administration that is working on lies and allegations and self-interest, And as long as we let that lead us into our thinking, Nate, we're going to have a problem. So I don't know what to say in answer to your question. California's got its problems, but no different than anywhere else in the country.
Maybe Marlon can answer this because he worked for the Justice Department for most of his career. And Marlon, I don't understand this. The Justice Department used to have a civil rights division that that at least on the surface protected rights of minorities and other people, and now they're out in all these political minefield. I don't get it.
Got a Justice Department that is favoring the administration and the president's whim. So, yeah, I like to hear what Marlon has to say about what the Justice Department is going to do.
Yes. Well, it is deeply troubling. And there are press reports that 1/3 of the members of the department have either retired or resigned. And I think it's really important that we have career public servants. And we're seeing a lot of that experience kind of going out the window. And then the other thing that we're looking at as well is the change in priorities. In terms of looking at the EEOC, now they've changed their priorities, that they're going to focus in on making it seem as though it's illegal to have a DEI policy. So these are problematic.
But what I'm concerned though is that I see the Justice Department, Marlon, involved in a political issue like every day. And, I saw where it's not just like the Coleman indictment and things like that, but they're just involved in all these political issues that I just never had seen before. It's almost
Yes,
like, I mean, and then also, what we didn't talk about was the $1.8 billion slush fund
oh my goodness.
that in American history, there's been different levels of corruption,
Yeah,
but
this is
I,
just staggering. I mean, this is just staggering, and I think the
maybe you can
audience
break this down, explain this to me, because it was so
should.
idiotic what they were saying until it
Like,
just quite frankly angered me. So tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the audience, has reason for concern. A couple different things. There was a lawsuit that was filed by this administration, and the president indicating that his tax returns were illegally disclosed. And so he basically is filing a lawsuit against an IRS that he controls. And the case is being defended. Anytime the United States is sued, the person that represents them is the Department of Justice, which is also under the control of the administration. So you have a lawsuit against yourself, and then you settle it in favor of yourself. And then there's an indication that, hey, there's going to be this settlement of $1.8 billion for individuals, some of whom, as you may recall, on January 6th, attacked our Capitol and tried to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. You have people like Stuart Rose, who was convicted of seditious conspiracy and was, sentenced to over 20 years in jail. And these are individuals that potentially could get compensation from this fund. So your audience should understand that, when this administration talks about, hey, there not being enough money, and for various projects that are going to help people, but at the same time, you're making funds available for people that try to violently overthrow our government. It's certainly very, very problematic. Now, the good thing about this, your audience should be very happy that a number of retired federal judges got together and raised a number of concerns to the district court judge, alleging there was a fraud in the court for the very reasons that I talked about, having an administration basically suing itself and getting an unjust settlement. So it will be interesting. The district court judge required the Department of Justice to issue a response fairly shortly. And so it will be interesting how this case proceeds.
Marlon, as you were talking there, it came to my mind that did I read or hear someone say that part of the settlement or the argument is that Trump's family members and himself can never be audited by the IRS or can't be audited by the IRS in the future for lifetime or something? Or is that just bad?
Well, I think either or. I mean, the whole prospect that you cannot go back in the past and see if someone is defrauding the government. And again, it's problematic because you're not only talking about the parties to the litigation, you're talking about family members that weren't parts of the litigation. The United States can't see if they've engaged in fraud. So that's certainly problematic and unprecedented. So something that we should really be concerned about, in my view. But I agree with you, Milton and Vanita, that these are unprecedented times, and it just really enforces the point that we really need to pay attention, in terms of our elections, because these administrations have great power to greatly impact our lives.
The administration believes that it can do whatever it is that they desire or want to do.
Thank you.
Full stop.
Thank
Okay. And they believe that nobody can stop them from any actions that they decide to take. This $10 billion action lawsuit was filed against the Internal Revenue Service for allegedly leaking the president's tax returns. And so a $10 billion lawsuit, this settlement, and most settlements have to be approved by courts, right? Which this was not, of $1.8 billion, leads me to ask a fundamental question, which is when you look at the lawsuit and the allegations regarding the illegal leaking of a tax return, would the damages ever, would a cause of action and damages ever conceivably reach $1.8 billion? Litigation trial lawyers?
We have a caller.
Yeah, go ahead, caller. You have a question or comment for you.
This is Guy. Is that me? It's on.
Go ahead. I can hear
Hello?
you, Guy. What's your question or comment, sir?
Yeah. I just wonder. You ever heard of Crispus Attucks? He was the first American killed in the American Revolution, and we don't hear too much about that in this 250-year celebration of the Declaration of Independence. We also don't hear too much about Benjamin Banneker, who, if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have had the plans for Washington, D.C., saved the layout for Washington, D.C. We also had Colin Powell, who probably would not have gone into Iran with starting a war, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Commander Brown, who was fired, probably wouldn't have gone into Iran like we've done a few months ago, and raising gas prices, food prices, etc. Why would a country want to dilute or neutralize the voting power of such men who have such important ideas to contribute? Why would they want to neutralize those through redistricting and diluting their voices? It's really kind of crazy, I think. But in addition to that, I wanted to say, have you heard that lawyers now, the administration is having trouble getting lawyers? They're running out of lawyers, and they're having trouble getting lawyers to plead their case because a lot of lawyers are feeling that they're going to be disbarred at some point. Have you heard anything about that? I heard that on the news, just a snatch of that recently. Have you heard anything like that?
Marlon, you've been tracking that?
Yes, I have, and I think that's absolutely correct. Our,
We're put in a position of trying to
resigning,
get out of something.
but recruiting people. Yeah, they're having a tremendous of time. And not only that, individuals are being sanctioned. And a lot of these judges
aren't tolerating, because these judges have lifetime appointments. So they're not tolerating individuals that are engaged in impropriety. We talked about the indictment of James Comey and Letitia James and some of the problems in terms of the grand jury process. And, there are individuals that have been involved with that have been called under the carpet, and there have been ethical concerns raised. So that's a deterrent for people wanting to apply for these jobs and risk their career and their livelihoods.
Well, as you can see, lifetime appointment, et cetera, doesn't really protect one from being axed out of that appointment or that job position. And people realize that, Marvin. So I used to believe too that federal judges were lifetime appointments and they had no fear whatsoever until I had the fortune of representing a federal judge one time who told me, Milton, we're always looking to go to higher grounds, just like everyone else, just like we got here. So we may want to be governor, we may want to be U.S. attorney, we may be on the U.S. Supreme Court one day. So this lifetime appointment that a lot of attorneys rest themselves on when they look at that judiciary is not necessarily what protects this society. I think right now we have an administration that's instilling fear in a lot of our institutions that we used to think were infallible, that was solid, that we could count on. But it's being proven that's not true anymore. So now I see us being put in a position of explaining things that we really can't explain, except this is turning into a dictatorship type of a government. It's turning into authoritarian type of government. It's turning into something that we haven't seen before in my experience, Nate, since you say I predate history, but it is, guys, and we're forced to try to explain this insanity that we're in the middle of. Maybe Vanita can do better with Chicago, but since they've always been window clean, but I have a problem trying to explain the moves that are happening now, and not
Well,
just.
with respect to the specific question the guy was raising with respect to the attorneys that are cautious about joining the DOJ. We see that former U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, I mean, she's the subject of an active ethics complaint that could result in disciplinary action or disbarment with the Florida bar. I mean, those complaints that have been brought by a broad coalition, including um, federal judges, um, a, a formal 23-page complaint has been filed with the um, Florida bar asserting her misconduct when she was leading the Department of Justice, specifically threatening to fire attorneys who refuse to pursue political objectives, and also, of course, with respect to the mishandling of the Epstein files.
Hey, Attorney Banks, I don't know if you saw this, but I saw the leakage of her testimony, unsworn testimony before the House committee, and she put the blame on guess who?
The acting Attorney General, Mr.
Yeah,
Blanche.
man, that was a legal jujitsu that she did, and that's going to be really a fascinating story to follow because I don't think people fully grasp uh, the scope of how bad this is. See, in other words, you got an act of Congress that orders you to do a certain thing, and you refuse to do that. So I think probably, Marlon, that it will invoke some criminality in this process. Minimal contempt of Congress as a point of beginning, and so
Right.
the evidence is not produced, and now she blames the new acting attorney general. It's a fascinating story to follow.
who's been now nominated to have the role permanently by the president. So, there was an act of Congress that basically said, hey, this information should be turned over to the public. And, former Attorney General Pam Bondi said, I have the information, but it has not been turned over for a number of reasons. So, this is certainly problematic. And I think, your audience, particularly young lawyers should recognize you have to protect your career. And, nothing is worth, going before a bar association, all that time and money and expense, and being held to account because you engage in misbehavior. It's important that we give our clients not only appropriate legal advice, but we also indicate that they have to meet the ethical rules. And I know there's some temptation that, hey, I'm going to get a temporary gain, but, through the prism of time, it's going to come back and bite you. And I think, Vanita is absolutely right. There are some ethics complaints filed, not only against Pam Bondi. We've seen John Eastman. He was a dean at a law school out where you're at, Milton Chapman Law School, and he lost his law license. And he was, putting forth these crackpot theories that people use to support the January 6th insurrection. So you have to make sure that, you are, following the letter of the law and the letter of our ethics rules.
Well, what is the probability that the current acting AG will get confirmed with this much baggage?
I think it's going to be hard, especially now that we're going towards the midterms, and there's such a small margin that the Republicans have to be in the majority. So I think it's going to be difficult to get confirmed, especially given all the issues regarding Epstein and some of the Epstein files not being released according to legislation that Congress passed. So I think it's going to be problematic, and there's only a limited time that you can serve in an acting role. So it will be interesting to see how this progresses.
Wasn't it
But
like 120 days or is it 180 days?
yes, I think it's 120 if I'm not mistaken.
Well, here's the second problem then, is that if he goes before Congress, but the problem is Pam Bondi, according to these leaked notes, said that she found out that he was meeting with what's her name, the Epstein lady. She found out later what he was doing, meeting with the Epstein. What's her name?
Maxwell.
Yeah, Maxwell. And so I was just thinking to myself, she's kind of putting all the blame on him as the fall person for this. If that's true, how do you get confirmed by Congress? How would you have any credibility in the Senate if these allegations have merit?
Yeah, I think it's going to be problematic. And your audience should remember Ghislaine Maxwell was a right-hand person for Epstein and, allowed him to, abuse, so many victims that have been coming forward. And then Todd Blanche, who we're talking about, indicated that he was going to give her a sweetheart deal. And hey, she was incarcerated, had a sentence, and, she was going to have to talk with him to get to the bottom of it. And a lot of the information that you relayed wasn't released. So there's a lot of different concerns, not only in terms of the Epstein file, but how that whole investigation was handled. I worked in the federal system, as you've indicated, and I've also had a chance to visit a number of our federal prisons across the country, because anytime you're convicted, you could be sent anywhere around the country. And so what made what Todd Blanche problematic is that the way the system works is that if you have a long sentence, you work your way down from maybe a maximum security to a medium security to a low. And the low is where, there may not even be a gate there, And the whole idea is that if you do something wrong, you'll go up to a higher level of security. So the whole press reports indicated that, after Maxwell spoke to Todd Blanche, she got favorable placements in a more favorable prison. And so those are questions he's going to have to answer as well,
Marlon,
in my view.
I have a little experience with the federal system too. She got 14 years, is she? 12 or 14? And right?
Correct.
And within that, a short time after that sentence, she was moved to a camp in Texas where she pretty much ran the camp. I won't say, no, that's a little exaggeration, but she was given protection. She was given privileges that other inmates in that camp did not have. And camps afford you a little bit more freedom than the prisons do. So here you got an example of a person who's been convicted, who has 14 years. They didn't work their way down. They were just placed in a camp, given special privileges. So it's another example of the corruption of our system right in our face. And she's not going to give up Trump's name. I don't know what the hesitation is to grant her a pardon on the part of Trump or what's going on, but it's known throughout the system through inmates that she has received very extraordinary, large favor from the federal government in her placement. You follow me? So it's just
Yeah, it's absolutely right.
so many examples of corruption and unfairness when I look at the common person treatment that it's hard to respect this system. I'm sorry.
Wow. Okay, let's go to caller. Renee, you have a question or comment for us today. Go ahead.
I have both. One, I wanted to ask Attorney Prime. He had mentioned, I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked. His last conversation was something about, oh God, I'm sorry, I just blew a fog. But anyway, so part of the comments I wanted to make is like, Attorney Grimes, what do you think about the Cali jungle election? Who do you think is going to come out of this? Do you think it'll be Hilton or Becerra? And then my other question I'll have to think about later, but I'm going to give that to Attorney Grimes first.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't like the reference to the jungle. For some reason that offends me, but I understand.
Yeah, I know, but yeah.
No, it's true. I have a sensitivity that I live with now at my old age. I don't know, my thin has gotten thinner. But getting back to your question, Hilton won't even recognize what Trump is saying about the election was illegal. So they have a disagreement on that. As a matter of fact, he laughs at Trump about that, the California election. So Becerra, I have some problems with, but I guess it's the better of the two evils. I'm hoping, I guess, that Hilton doesn't win because of his link with Trump. But Becerra doesn't necessarily pass muster for me either. I don't know. You know, you probably got a better idea about what's the right thing here than I do.
Well, I wouldn't say that because you're an expert, but I will say that I do have my opinions, but that's coming from a different place because I live in New York City. And then I think with Attorney Primes, I was going to ask you something about the Supreme Court, of how you feel about the fact that the court maps were discriminatory in 2023, and then today saying, or a couple of days ago, they're saying, oh no, it's perfect to discriminate because they're eating up their own words. I'm sorry, they're eating up their own words, and I'm trying to figure out how Attorney Primes feels about that. That 2023 they had something different to say, and then today they're saying something absolutely against their own ruling. Thank you.
I agree. And if you look at the opinions of Ketanji Brown Jackson, she has some excellent, and also Justice Sotomayor, they're really chronicling this. So the problem that's going on that Justice Jackson is chronicling is that a case is supposed to go through the trial court, the appellate court, to the Supreme Court. All right. And then when it goes to the trial court, there's a determination if there is error after there's been fact finding. The appellate court does what deals with that, and then the Supreme Court deals with whether the appellate court has engaged in has not followed applicable law. What the Supreme Court is doing is they're not doing any fact finding that the trial court normally does. They're just making their own determinations. In this case in Alabama, what Justice Jackson pointed out is that, hey, they are not only failing to do any fact finding, but they're throwing out fact finding of a trial court that had a chance to review the credibility of witnesses that were before them. So it really is upside down. And, I think it's even more reason for us to really kind of talk about Supreme Court reform. There's been a number of proposals out there that we really need to think seriously about.
Right.
Okay, and then the last statement I'm going to make from New York City is that I love my mayor. Love it. And go Knicks. So there's that.
Well,
Well, the
so
Knicks beat my
far,
Cavs, but go Knicks. Yes.
well, so far, I've been impressed with one thing that your mayor has done. I mean, he managed to balance the budget, had a big initiative to get the homeless people off the street. I think that's a good thing because that's a problem in all of our major cities in America. We have too many people that don't have the resources to have housing, and then they live on the streets or underneath bridges or places like that. So I'm really grateful for those efforts. They have an effort going on in our city to try to make accommodation for displaced folks, but it's kind of odd, Milton. Here I'm being given a supplemental tax to pay for the homeless people as a small business owner. And my concern is that we have the billion-dollar corporations here, like the Lillis and Cummins. They pay nothing,
No.
So,
Sounds fair.
so the little guys pays for the homeless, and the big guys buy yachts and private jets.
Sounds fair to me.
Okay. Well, I will say this, that's the difference from Donnie and any other person that's trying to do this. He, the Peter tax that he put on people who owned several homes in New York City but didn't live here and were not paying taxes. That's a little bit different. And I could also say that there's a recent polling that came out, and I have to check the polling people because, polls aren't all the same. But there's a polling that says that Black people here in New York City, which I'm one of, but I voted for him and I pushed him. But they said that Black people were not they were less than, he didn't take the majority of Black voters in 2024, but his polling with Black people here in New York City is higher than any other ethnic group right now. And that's because this man walks the walk and he talks. He doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. And what he did was he put in place some things that helped not just, average, white voters who are trying to make it in the city, but also Black voters as well. And what he has understood, which I appreciate about him, is that race, quote, race and class are intersections, but they're not the same thing. And you have to come at them in different ways. And that's what I love about it. And I'm going to hang up and let you talk to other callers. Thank you.
Thank you.
They're not the same thing. And you have
Okay, Pierre, go ahead. You have a question or comment? Got a short time left. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, quick, I had to step away. Quick blast. Nate, cover the Bears coming to Northwest Indiana if you haven't already done so. I'll get off the air. Thank
Which
you.
one?
The
We
Bears
haven't
announcement that.
We
Okay,
haven't
go ahead, Benita.
we haven't discussed it today, and Northwest Indiana is still in consideration, it's my understanding, as well as Arlington Heights here in Illinois, which I think that, and the Bears are going to make a decision, they say, soon, late spring, early summer. So a decision is imminent. I find it untenable that Chicago is not being actively considered at this time. The Illinois legislature ended its session without an agreement with the Chicago Bears, which
Well,
I
I
just
thought it.
go ahead.
I thought it was a done deal. And from you attorneys, can they come out and say that and then back out at the last minute?
It just depends on whether or not a deal is inked and signed, it would seem to me. But I have not heard that Hammond has been definitively selected. The last I heard this week was that Arlington Heights, Illinois, and Hammond are still in consideration, with no deal with the city of Chicago.
Okay.
But the Bears voted real quickly to move forward with the deal with Indiana. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time slot. My guess, we got 30 seconds. Any final comments? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to talk to you next Saturday, and have a great weekend, and go out and encourage somebody to vote in the upcoming election, folks. Thank you so much for calling us today. And thank you, our VIP guests.